Have you ever paused to wonder about the hidden forces shaping your life? Like imagine if Usain Bolt, in his prime, could race against himself. But at every single age, who would actually win? Would it be the lightning fast 20-something? Or maybe a more seasoned strategic Usain Bolt in his 30s? It's not just a fun thought experiment, right? It immediately makes you consider how our abilities, both physical and mental, truly shift and, well, evolve throughout our lives. So today we're embarking on a pretty fascinating deep dive. We're going beyond the common assumptions, popular beliefs. We're really digging into scientific research and data to uncover some surprising insights into human potential, success, and well-being. From the very moment we're born to the rhythm of our sleep, and even our physical height will reveal these unseen influences that shape us. Think of this as your shortcut to being genuinely well-informed about yourself and the world around you, hopefully filled with surprising facts and just enough humor to keep you hooked. So let's get started. Okay, so let's begin by challenging a really common belief. This idea that our physical and mental peaks are squarely in our 20s. And then after that, it's pretty much all downhill. It's almost like you hit 30 and you're just managing the decline, right? But what does the actual data truly tell us about this widespread perception? Is it really just one dramatic summit, or is the journey maybe a bit more complex?
That's a great question, and it gets right to the heart of, well, a major misconception, I think. What's truly fascinating here is that the conventional idea of a singular peak in our 20s is just far too simplistic when you look at the comprehensive data. Research across various domains of human performance actually reveals a whole series of distinct peaks that occur throughout our lifespan. So each stage, from early childhood all the way into old age, it offers its own unique advantages and moments of peak performance. Think of it less like a single mountain to climb, and maybe more like a mountain range, with different summits waiting to be conquered at various points in our lives.
Okay, so if the 20s aren't the only peak, let's rewind all the way back to our earliest years, childhood. When you think about young kids, they just seem to have boundless energy. They can run around forever, seem tireless, and bounce back from falls incredibly quickly. Beyond that obvious physical vitality, what else is really remarkable about those formative years in terms of development?
Yeah, their physical resilience is quite remarkable. The data clearly shows that fatigue resistance and the sheer speed of recovery actually peak in childhood. Their bodies are incredibly resilient during this period, almost as if, as some researchers humorously put it, they are made out of rubber. And this physical elasticity isn't just about energy. Their flexibility also peaks around early adolescence, making them incredibly adaptable physically. But beyond the physical, those early years are also really crucial for certain kinds of learning.
You're talking about those intense learning windows, often called critical periods, right? It feels like kids just soak up information effortlessly in a way adults really struggle with.
That's a perceptive observation. It raises an important question about, well, how our brains are wired at different ages. For example, when it comes to learning a second language, the research suggests that the critical period for achieving that near-native fluency seems to extend until around age 7. Now, while it's certainly possible to learn a second language later in life and become proficient, reaching that truly near-native level of accent and grammatical intuition becomes much, much harder after that age window closes. The neural circuits are simply more receptive, more malleable during those early years. And similarly, research also points to distinct critical periods in childhood for developing musical abilities. Early exposure and training can have a profound, lasting impact on a person's capacity for musicality. So yeah, in childhood, your body is like rubber, and your brain is kind of like a sponge, but maybe only for certain types of information at certain times.
Okay, then we get to the 20s. A decade many of us associate with feeling, well, invincible. It's when a lot of people feel they're at the very top of their game, physically and mentally. According to the data, what specific abilities truly reach their prime during this stage?
Right. This is where some of our most impressive capabilities generally reach their zenith. Our reflexes, for instance, and raw reaction times, they tend to peak dramatically in your 20s. A study that rigorously measured reaction times of players in video games, for example, precisely pinpointed the average peak at age 24. And this isn't just for digital dexterity. It translates directly to many physical endeavors. For explosive sports demanding rapid bursts of speed and power, like the 100-meter sprint, the typical peak age for athletes falls within a narrow window, usually around 25 to 27 years old. Usain Bolt, the fastest man in history, set his current world record at the youthful age of 23, so that fits right in. Similarly, in Olympic weightlifting, athletes typically reach their age peak around 26, showcasing their maximum power output. Even in complex, dynamic team sports like basketball and football, while objective measurement can be a bit trickier, studies consistently place the peak performance ages for players squarely in their 20s.
So it's clearly not just physical performance peaking then. What about cognitively? Are there significant mental abilities that also reach their prime in your 20s? What's happening inside our heads?
Cognitively, yeah, your 20s are a time of incredible sharpness. Your visual working memory, that's your brain's ability to temporarily remember and effectively use visual details, typically peaks right around age 20. And perhaps even more significantly, your fluid intelligence. That critical ability to solve brand new problems, to reason abstractly, adapt to novel situations without relying on pre-existing knowledge or facts, that generally peaks in your early 20s. So you are, in essence, incredibly quick, adaptable during this period. However, it's also important to note that while you might be incredibly sharp in this fluid sense, you're perhaps not yet wise. Accumulated knowledge, experience, what we often call wisdom, that's distinctly different and typically comes much later in life, often requires decades of lived experience and reflection to truly mature. So you're building a powerful engine, but the vast library of knowledge is still being constructed.
Right. So we've talked about the sprint of youth, but what happens when we settle into our 30s? Suddenly your hangovers might last 2 days instead of 2 hours, right? And you start looking at your younger self, wondering how you ever managed all that. It's this curious mix, settling down, but simultaneously pushing new physical limits. Some friends are obsessed with air fryers, others are running marathons. What kind of changes and new peaks can we expect as we move into our 30s and beyond?
This is where the data truly surprises many people who assume it's all decline. For endurance sports, for instance, the data reveals a truly fascinating kind of counterintuitive trend. The longer the event, the later the age peak tends to be. So, while traditional marathon runners covering 26.2 miles typically peak around age 30, the ultra-endurance athletes like 100-kilometer ultra-marathoners, they often reach their peak around age 35. And for the truly grueling 100-mile ultramarathoners, their performance peak can even extend as late as 37 or 39 years old. This suggests that sustained effort, mental fortitude, accumulated experience play a much larger role in those extended challenges. Furthermore, it's also around this age that most people hit their top physical strength. Powerlifters, for example, typically peaking around age 35. This isn't just about absolute strength, but often a combination of mature muscle development and refined technique.
Huh. So while some things might start to slow down a bit physically, it sounds like other capacities are just hitting their stride. What about mentally? Are there cognitive abilities that continue to improve or peak in our 30s, sort of define that downhill after 20s narrative?
Absolutely. While it's true that some very specific cognitive abilities, particularly those linked to raw speed of processing, might start a gentle, almost imperceptible decline after the 20s, others are still very much developing and even reaching their peak well into your 30s. For instance, the data indicates that the ability to remember new faces, a critical social and professional skill, actually tends to peak past age 30. This suggests that aspects of memory related to real-world social interaction, practical application, might strengthen even as other forms of memory shift. If we look at the bigger picture, the widespread notion that you peak in your 20s and it's all downhill, well, it's demonstrably not true across the board. The scientific data clearly illustrates there are several significant physical and cognitive peaks that occur well into your 30s and even beyond. It's a much more dynamic and multifaceted journey than popular belief suggests.
That's truly encouraging. So if we're looking at the broader arc of life, what about the second half? Are there any significant peaks left after our 30s, or do we just enter a long plateau? What can we look forward to as we age beyond what might be considered our youthful prime?
Oh, the journey is far from over. While what we call fluid intelligence, that ability to solve novel problems quickly, might indeed start to wane a bit with age. Crystallized intelligence, which is your ability to use accumulated knowledge, skills, experience, effectively actually strengthens throughout adulthood and often continues to improve well into later life. This is incredibly crucial for many careers and life roles where wisdom, judgment, and a vast store of information are paramount. For example, contrary to the persistent stereotype of young, fresh-faced founders, data shows that the average age of a successful startup founder, someone creating a thriving new business, is actually 45. This highlights the value of experience, networks, accumulated insights that mature individuals bring to the table.
That's a powerful reframing of what peaking means. And you found data even suggesting a peak in something as profound as happiness. That happens much later in life. That really challenges common perceptions, doesn't it?
It truly does. This raises an important question about long-term well-being and what truly constitutes a fulfilling life. There's a fascinating concept known as the U-shape theory of happiness. The general idea is that self-reported happiness tends to dip during midlife, that period, often associated with intense stress, career pressures, raising families. And then, quite remarkably, it begins to rise again, peaking in old age. A study analyzing data from the European Social Survey provided compelling evidence for this. While they found higher income correlated with higher overall happiness, they initially saw older people reporting lower happiness. But here's the crucial adjustment. If you statistically account for other significant factors like health, having children, living with someone the U curve indeed holds strong, this means controlling for these important life circumstances, people in old age are likely to report higher happiness compared to younger individuals, regardless of income. The data even showed for lower and middle income groups that midlife dip was quite pronounced. So while the U-shaped theory is still debated and complex, it certainly offers an uplifting perspective that many people genuinely hit a peak in happiness at a very advanced stage of life. Hashtag tech maintaining and improving.
This is really the good news in all of this. So this nuanced view of peaking across the lifespan. Does this mean we're sort of stuck once we've hit a particular peak in a certain area? Or can we actively do something to maintain our abilities or even continue to improve well past these average peak ages?
Not at all. That's perhaps the most important takeaway from this entire discussion. For most of these physical and mental capabilities, you can absolutely maintain good form, and in many cases, even significantly improve them with consistent training, dedication, and proactive self-care. Think of professional athletes. Many maintain excellent form throughout their careers, well beyond their statistical peak ages. A fantastic example is Bernard Hopkins, the professional boxer. Famously won an IBF light heavyweight title when he was an astonishing 49 years old. This wasn't by accident, it was meticulous training and discipline. The same fundamental principle applies to your brain. While it's true some neural deterioration naturally occurs with age, your brain possesses remarkable neuroplasticity, meaning it can still adapt, form new connections, and improve its performance through continuous mental training and stimulation.
So, given all this fascinating data, what does this all mean for us as individuals, looking at our own lives, how we can best navigate these different phases? What's the actionable advice here?
It means actively taking a holistic approach to your well-being throughout your entire life. This includes diligently taking care of your physical health, staying consistently active, making healthy dietary choices, prioritizing sufficient quality sleep. It also means nurturing your mental health through engaging in social activities, pursuing hobbies that bring you joy and intellectual stimulation, and effectively managing stress. And finally, crucially, it means consistently engaging in mentally stimulating activities throughout your life, whether that's learning a new skill, reading widely, or challenging your brain with new problems. The core message is incredibly empowering. No matter how old you are right now, it is never too late to start climbing towards a new peak. Whether that's physical fitness, mental acuity, or even overall happiness, your potential is a lifelong journey.
It's incredible how many unseen forces shape us. From our age and our multiple peaks across life to, well, how we were born. Speaking of things beyond our control, let's turn to something you've mentioned. How even something as simple as the month we're born can have these unseen implications. Okay, so here's a thought that might challenge our belief in pure meritocracy. What if the month you were born actually had a much larger, more profound impact on your success trajectory in sports, education, even your career than you ever imagined? I mean, it sounds almost like astrology, right?
Okay.
But the data tells a very different, surprising story. Take the Spanish Football League, for instance. There's a statistically significant overrepresentation of players born in the first 6 months of the year. That's not random.
You're right, that's a perfect example of what researchers call the relative age effect, or RAE. It's a powerful and often overlooked phenomenon that demonstrates how arbitrary cutoff dates can create lasting disparities. The data from places like the Spanish Football League makes it starkly evident. We see significantly more players born earlier in the year compared to those born later. It's not due to seasonal astrological influences, but rather a structural bias that plays out over time. Hashtag the relative age effect explained.
How can something as seemingly random, uncontrollable as a birth month possibly make such a profound and lasting difference in someone's life? It just feels counterintuitive at first glance.
Let's unpack this with a simple, tangible example to make it clear. Imagine two friends, both born in the same calendar year. One on January 1st, the other on December 31st. By their 18th birthday, they might seem quite similar in age, the January-born one being only about 6% older. You probably wouldn't notice much difference. However, let's travel back in time to their very first day of primary school. Even though the absolute age difference is still 11 months and 30 days, the relative age difference is now dramatically larger. At that critical early age, the January-born child is approximately 18% older than their December-born peer. And at such a young formative age, those additional 11 months of growth and development make a truly significant difference. In height, strength, but also mental maturity, cognitive development, even attention span. This immediate advantage, purely due to timing, gives the relatively older child a noticeable edge in activities like sports and academics. This phenomenon where people born earlier in a given school or sports year tend to perform better than those born later is precisely what we define as the relative age effect.
So this early, seemingly small advantage can snowball into much larger ones later on. Is there a specific term for that compounding effect?
Yes, precisely. It's famously known as the Matthew effect, a concept derived from that biblical verse, for to everyone who has, more will be given. In this context, it means small initial advantages due to relative age can compound and snowball into significantly bigger advantages later. An early positive feedback loop gets established. The slightly older child is seen as more capable, gets more attention, better opportunities, which further enhances their development, making them even more capable, and so on. It's a powerful illustration of how seemingly minor disparities can become deeply entrenched. #RE in sports. In the world of sports, the relative age effect is particularly stark. Children are almost universally grouped for youth leagues and development programs based on their calendar year of birth. Consequently, the children born earlier in that year are, on average, physically taller, stronger, faster than their peers born later in the same year. This immediate physical and often mental advantage means the older child has a significantly higher chance of being selected by a coach for competitive teams or more advanced programs. Being selected, in turn, means the child gains more playing experience, receives better, more intensive training, and ultimately has a much higher probability of becoming a professional athlete later. It becomes a classic example of the Matthew effect in action.
Right, the older players picked because they look better.
Exactly. And then they genuinely become better over time because they were picked, seemingly validating the coach's initial decision. It's a powerful, often unconscious, self-fulfilling prophecy.
That's a strong claim about birth month influencing athletic careers.
Hmm.
Is there any robust data that really backs that up beyond anecdotes?
Indeed. A detailed Swedish study focusing on 14 to 17-year-old athletes across multiple sports found consistently skewed birthday distributions. For instance, in athletics, they found a significant gap. 27% more athletes born at the beginning of the year than expected, and conversely, 28% fewer born at the end. These are substantial disparities. The authors highlighted the practical implication. Teenagers born in the first 4 months were a striking 74% more likely to become athletes than those born in the last 4 months. They powerfully frame these gaps in terms of missed stars, talented teenagers with potential who simply didn't make it because of their birth month timing. They observed similar results in cross-country skiing, alpine skiing, demonstrating how pervasive the RAE is across different sports. Now, this raises an interesting question. What about adult athletes? Does this early advantage persist indefinitely? Well, the interesting finding is that among adults who did make it to professional levels, the birth weight distribution isn't strongly correlated to their performance. This suggests that while early selection is heavily biased, those younger kids, often the underdogs, might have had to develop superior skills, grit, or maybe a deeper understanding of the game to compensate and ultimately succeed. Their journey might be harder, but once they break through, birth month doesn't dictate performance among the elite. #RAE in education.
That's incredible for sports. But does this subtle, unseen effect also show up in the classroom, impacting academic paths? I imagine the cognitive advantages for older kids would translate there too.
Absolutely. The relative age effect is just as pervasive, if not more so, in education. While the specific cutoff dates for school years vary by country, some use December 31st, others use August or September, the fundamental outcome is the same. You inevitably end up with a group of students who are relatively older and more cognitively developed compared to their younger classmates in the same grade. As a direct result, these older children, being more developmentally ready, tend to score higher marks on average. They are also more likely to be identified for and get into gifted programs, and by the time they finish school, they are statistically more likely to attend higher education in academic schools over vocational ones. This is the Matthew effect again. Early learning skills and confidence build over years, creating significant academic advantages that influence their entire educational pathway. A detailed Dutch study, for example, clearly illustrated this. Younger students within a grade struggled more often, sometimes repeating grades, while the older students were more likely to excel, sometimes even skipping grades. #RAE in career and leadership.
So if these small early advantages snowball through sports and education, it's not a huge leap to imagine them extending into our professional lives, even impacting who reaches leadership positions. Is there data for that?
Indeed, the Whipple effect can absolutely be seen in professional careers and leadership roles. Research consistently points to a relative age effect in the highest echelons of leadership. Studies analyzing the U.S. Senate and House, Finnish politics, even S&P 500 company CEOs all reveal a similar significant conclusion. Professionals born in the later months of the school calendar year are notably underrepresented in leadership positions. This suggests those early advantages in confidence, academic achievement, opportunities, initially granted by being relatively older, can translate into long-term career benefits, making it easier for some to climb the ladder, while others with equal talent may face an uphill battle simply due to birth timing. Hashtag addressing the RE.
So if you're listening to this and realizing you were a late-born kid in your group, what can actually be done? Can we counteract this powerful influence for future generations?
Well, you certainly can't change your birth month, but the good news is we can significantly reduce this effect for younger generations. The core message from the research is fundamental. We should strive to group children based on their abilities and developmental readiness, rather than relying solely on arbitrary chronological age cutoffs. In sports, for instance, coaches should be trained to select based on demonstrated skill, potential, athleticism, not just size or strength, which are often just proxies for relative age. In schools, the principle is similar. Allow children to learn and progress at their own individual pace rather than being rigidly forced into age-based cohorts. And crucially, a key step is widespread education. We need to actively educate coaches, teachers, parents, leaders about the profound, often unconscious consequences of the RAE. Simply being aware of this phenomenon can help mitigate its impact by encouraging more equitable opportunities for all kids, regardless of when their birthday happens to be.
Wow. The month you're born is like a lottery ticket you didn't even know you bought, influencing your path in surprising ways. But beyond that, what about other physical traits that are also part of that lottery, like our height? It turns out that also carries some surprising implications and advantages, depending on the context. We often don't consciously think about height as a major factor in success, but it's hard to ignore certain patterns. Like, if you look at American presidents, figures like Joe Biden, Donald Trump, even historically Abraham Lincoln were all notably tall for their time. What's the real story here? Is there actually a link between height and success, or is it just, a coincidence?
That's a great question, and it's a topic where the data is far more nuanced than simple stereotypes suggest. The research indicates that height indeed impacts various aspects of our lives: sports performance, health outcomes, dating dynamics, career advancement. However, it's not a universal advantage. The benefits and drawbacks of being tall or short are highly context dependent and far more complex than just taller is better. Hashtag defining tall and short.
Okay, before we dive into the impacts, how do we even begin to define what's tall or short? Especially when you consider the incredible diversity of human height globally. It's not a fixed standard, is it?
Exactly. What's considered tall in one country might be completely average in another. Average heights vary quite significantly. For instance, Guatemala has the shortest women, averaging just 1.51 meters, while Timus records the shortest men at 1.60 meters. On the other end, the Netherlands holds the title for the tallest country, with men there averaging a remarkable 1.84 meters. To give some perspective, American gymnast Simone Biles stands at a compact 1.42 meters, a huge advantage in her sport, while NBA player Zach Edey towers at 2.24 meters. It's also interesting from our audience survey that men, on average, tend to exaggerate their self-reported height by about an inch.
Ah, really?
Yeah, it highlights how culturally significant height can be, even subconsciously. Hashtag impact on sports. What's fascinating here is that the physical advantages conferred by height depend entirely and profoundly on the specific sport you're playing. There's no one-size-fits-all ideal.
So it's like being tall is a huge asset in basketball, but being short is the ultimate advantage in gymnastics. How does that actually work from a physics standpoint?
You've hit on the perfect examples. The fundamental physics of our bodies change in complex ways with height. For someone tall, like a basketball player, yeah, greater reach is undeniable for blocking shots, dunks. They also tend to have more raw strength for pushing or throwing because muscle cross-sectional area scales up faster than length. So that gives them an advantage in sports like javelin or fighting. However, it gets really interesting when you look at strength relative to body weight or how movement works. While a taller person has more absolute strength, their strength relative to their total body weight is actually lower. This is because volume and weight increase much faster power of 3 than strength generating area power of 2. This ratio is crucial for sports where you lift or maneuver your own body weight. Like rock climbing, where being shorter can be a significant advantage. It's also harder for taller people to change direction quickly or spin rapidly. Their mass and rotational inertia increase disproportionately with height power of 4 or 5.
Wow, power of 5.
Yeah, which is precisely why you see shorter athletes dominate in sports like gymnastics or figure skating, where precise, fast rotations are key. Conversely, for a tall, heavy person, it's harder for them to stop their motion, but it also makes them harder for others to stop. Useful in American football, breaking tackles. So the benefits are truly dictated by the demands of the sport. Hashtag impact on health.
Okay, what about health? Is being tall inherently healthier, or does it come with its own set of unique health challenges?
Yeah.
There's this perception sometimes that taller people are just more robust.
This raises an important question, and the answer is not straightforward. For instance, that finding from 19th century Spain showing taller men lived longer. Well, it wasn't because being tall directly caused longevity. Instead, their height was a marker of better nutrition and living conditions during childhood. In essence, being short wasn't inherently unhealthy. Rather, it often indicated a disadvantaged environment. Globally, heights strongly reflect living standards. Countries with a higher human development index have taller people. High childhood mortality correlates with shorter populations. The world average height increased remarkably 8 to 9 centimeters in 100 years as living standards improved. Now, when we look at the direct physiological impacts of height, it's truly a mixed bag. Taller individuals tend to experience harder falls, impact force increases faster than surface area to absorb it, higher risk of injury and accidents. They also often have more back problems because the torque when bending increases faster than muscle counter torque. On the flip side, taller people often have lower resting heart rates, which can be beneficial for cardiovascular health. And some research even suggests taller people might be more likely to get certain types of cancer, and that on average, shorter people may have a slightly longer life expectancy. So the idea that taller automatically means healthier, definitely a myth. It comes with its own unique set of risks and benefits. Hashtag impact on dating life.
Okay, this is a big one for many people. Lots of opinions, anecdotes out there. Do height preferences actually play out in dating the way we often imagine? Or is that also more complex when you look at the data?
The data on height in dating is quite revealing. It does confirm some common perceptions, but also challenges others. For instance, that self-reported height data,
Yeah.
men exaggerating by an inch on average. There's even a curious dip around 5'11" and a bump at 6 foot, suggesting some men just under 6 feet might round up to hit that mark. Right. And when it comes to stated preferences, women do tend to prefer taller partners. Men generally prefer shorter partners, with women's preference often being stronger. However, it's not as rigid as some might think. Firstly, people generally prefer partners whose heights are somewhat similar to their own, suggesting relative compatibility matters more than an absolute ideal. And importantly, one paper specifically suggested there were no statistically significant differences in how often short men went on dates compared to tall men. This implies that while height might be a preference on paper, its actual effect on attraction and dating frequency is described as modest. It's just one of many, many factors. So while it can be a perceived challenge for shorter men or taller women, it's far from being the sole determinant of dating success. Hashtag impact on career.
Beyond personal relationships, what about professional success? We started with tall presidents. Is there a concrete link between height and career achievement? Or is that correlation also influenced by other, less obvious factors?
This is where we need to be really careful about sampling bias. It's true that people from more privileged socioeconomic backgrounds are statistically more likely to be taller, better nutrition, education, healthcare, and childhood. So when we see a correlation between height and career success, it could often be explained by these underlying background advantages, not height itself causing success. However, even when researchers meticulously adjust for these socioeconomic factors, trying to isolate the effect of height, some subtle advantages favoring taller people still seem to emerge. They are often perceived as more competent, more employable, healthier. There's a tendency to see them as more leader-like, and they often report higher self-esteem and social esteem. Curiously, being extremely tall or extremely short doesn't seem to have the same significant impact on perception, suggesting maybe a sweet spot of perceived advantage. Ultimately, height is just one of many, many variables predicting success, and its influence is often overstated. The data shows it's a factor, but not destiny. there are countless examples of high-achieving professionals of all heights across every field. Even in sports where size seems paramount, we see incredible examples defying expectations. It's about harnessing your unique attributes within your chosen context.
So height is another intricate layer of the human experience. Data helps us understand it, revealing biases and advantages that aren't immediately obvious. And now, let's talk about something incredibly personal that still pits our biology against societal norms: our natural sleep schedule. It feels like there are truly two kinds of people in this world: the cheerful, annoyingly energetic early birds, and the perpetually tired, often misunderstood night owls. It's a fundamental difference. But what if being a night owl actually carried a hidden cost? A price that you pay just for having that natural sleep type in a world largely designed for early risers.
That's a great observation. It raises an important question about how our natural chronotypes, our individual biologically preferred sleep-wake times, interact with, and often clash with, broader societal expectations. While it's true most people, about 60%, fall somewhere in the middle, an intermediate chronotype, there are significant minorities who are strong early birds or strong night owls. And these preferences aren't simply choices, they're deeply influenced by both genetics and environment, climate, culture, daily habits. #tag defining chronotypes.
You even surveyed your audience about this, which gives us some real-world insight beyond just scientific definitions. What did you find about how people identify?
Interestingly, when I surveyed my audience, the results were somewhat surprising given popular stereotypes. Only 8% identified as strong night owls, the evening type, compared to a very similar 7% who identified as strong early birds, the morning type. The vast majority, a substantial 85%, fell into that intermediate category, indicating most people's natural preferences aren't at the extreme ends. #tag differences between chronotypes. And the distinctions go beyond just when you prefer to sleep. Early birds, as you'd expect, naturally wake early, feel ready for bed early. Their bodies show earlier cycles of crucial hormones like cortisol, waking, and melatonin, sleep onset. Personality-wise, early birds are often linked to traits like conscientiousness, being thorough, efficient perhaps, benefiting from aligning with the conventional workday.
Okay, so if early birds are all conscientious and efficient, does that mean night owls are just, well, lazy? That's a common stereotype, but I suspect the data offers a more nuanced picture.
Quite the opposite, actually. The data reveals night owls are far from lazy. They're more common in adolescence, where a natural shift to a later chronotype often happens. They are frequently associated with personality traits like greater openness to new experiences and ideas, suggesting a more flexible, curious mindset. Furthermore, night owls are often found to be more intelligent and associated with higher cognitive function. However, and this is crucial, these are correlations, not causations. Sleeping late itself won't make you smarter. It suggests a predisposition that might align with those cognitive traits. It's about how the brain functions, not just the sleep timing.
Right. And this is precisely where the price of being a night owl comes in. And it's a significant one. We all possess an inherent biological clock governing our circadian rhythms. These regulate a myriad of bodily processes, hormones, temperature, when we feel awake and sleepy. However, when our social commitments, work, school schedules fundamentally clash with these innate biological rhythms, it results in social jet lag. This is essentially a state where your body biologically expects to be asleep, but society demands you be awake.
This persistent mismatch is disproportionately and particularly harmful for night owls, as they are constantly fighting their natural inclination.
So the data clearly shows night owls experience this out of sync, feeling much more acutely. It sounds incredibly draining.
Yes, the survey data vividly illustrates this. A striking 54% of night owls reported a very different sleep schedule on weekdays compared to weekends, highlighting the significant social jet lag they endure. In stark contrast, only 9% of early birds reported such a large discrepancy. Unsurprisingly, when asked about sleep quality, early birds reported much higher satisfaction. This constant biological misalignment leads to a cascade of negative health outcomes for night owls: higher rates of insomnia, mood disorders, anxiety disorders, substance use disorders. The data also links them to higher incidences of personality disorders, sleep apnea, even infertility. And, critically, one of the most alarming findings: night owls, on average, have a lower life expectancy compared to early birds. This isn't about choice. It's about the profound biological toll of living out of sync in a society largely operating on an early bird schedule. #hashtag historical context and social stigma.
That's a heavy price to pay for a natural preference. It makes me wonder, has society always been structured this way? Were our ancestors all early birds? Or is this modern structure a relatively new imposition?
That's a fascinating question if we consider the bigger picture. It suggests our ancestral past might have been far more accommodating. A fascinating 2016 study of the Hadza hunter-gatherer tribe in Tanzania, who live in conditions similar to our ancient ancestors, sheds light on this. Over 20 days of monitoring, researchers discovered there were only 18 minutes in that entire time when everyone in the tribe was simultaneously asleep.
Only 18 minutes.
Oh,
Wow.
right. This continuous vigilance suggests night owls might have actually evolved as a natural selection mechanism, ensuring someone was always awake to protect the group from dangers. It points to a potential evolutionary benefit for having a mix of chronotypes within a community. Despite this plausible evolutionary benefit, there's a clear and pervasive social stigma against night owls in modern society. It's deeply embedded. Proverbs across virtually all languages universally praise early rising. The early bird catches the worm. Early to bed, early to rise. These aren't just sayings. They reflect a cultural value system equating early rising with health, responsibility, success. This pervasive narrative contributes to the feeling among night owls that they are inherently misaligned, even lazy, despite their biology, compounding the challenges they face. ###### adjusting sleep schedules.
So what can you actually do if you're a night owl struggling in an early bird world, constantly fighting your internal clock? Is it possible to shift your chronotype, or are you just suck?
While genetics play a significant role, it's not an unchangeable destiny. You can absolutely influence your environment and habits to adjust your schedule and mitigate some negative impacts. General sleep hygiene guidelines are key. First, try to maintain consistent wake times, even on weekends. Helps anchor your circadian rhythm. Second, get morning sunlight soon after waking signals daytime. Avoid bright light in the evenings, especially from screens, suppresses melatonin. Third, train your body. Bed is mainly for sleep and sex. Avoid working or eating there. Fourth, be mindful of stimulants. Avoid afternoon, evening caffeine. Counterintuitively, if you can't sleep, don't force it. Don't stay in bed tossing and turning. Get up. Do something relaxing in low light. Return when sleepy. And maybe most importantly, try not to overthink it. Obsessing over sleep makes it harder. If these guidelines aren't enough, professional help is available. Therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI, can successfully address chronic sleep problems and help align your internal clock better with your life.
It's incredible. So many unseen forces shaping us: our age, multiple peaks, our birth month, height, even our sleep rhythm. Data continuously challenges our assumptions about who we are and how we thrive. It's a powerful reminder that our intuitive understanding is often incomplete. #outro. What a deep dive this has been. We've unpacked some truly profound insights into the human experience. We started by exploring how our potential doesn't just hit one peak, but shifts and evolves throughout our entire lives, from childhood to old age. Then we delved into the subtle yet surprisingly powerful influence of our birth month, how that can unexpectedly shape our trajectory in sports, leadership. We also uncovered the often overlooked pluses and minuses of our physical height, demonstrating its nuanced role in athletics, career perceptions. And finally, we explored that fascinating, often challenging dynamic of our natural sleep rhythms, our chronotypes, as they clash with or conform to society's design.
What's truly fascinating here is how these insights, all derived from extensive data analysis, rigorous research, reveal these often invisible forces and biases that profoundly shape our individual lives. They challenge our ingrained assumptions, offer a far more nuanced, complex, and ultimately more accurate understanding of success, well-being, and the inherent personal differences that make each of us unique. This data empowers us to look beyond simple explanations, appreciate the intricate interplay of biology, environment, societal structure.
So what does this all truly mean for you, listening now, armed with this deeper knowledge? It means you can approach your own life, your challenges, your unique strengths, with greater self-awareness, informed perspective. It helps us understand why certain things might have played out the way they did. And crucially, it allows us to approach others' lives with greater empathy. It helps us appreciate the incredible diversity of human experience and, perhaps most importantly, to critically question why certain societal structures might not serve everyone equally well, potentially stifling talent or imposing unnecessary costs on those who don't fit a specific mold.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, these deep dives into human data fundamentally alter how we perceive ourselves and the world. They move us beyond superficial understanding into evidence-based insight, providing a foundation for more equitable, effective approaches to human flourishing. That's a truly profound thought to leave with. So think about this. If data can reveal such profound hidden influences on individual life's factors, as seemingly mundane as your birth month or your natural sleep pattern, what other invisible forces might be shaping our collective future? Factors that we're only just beginning to measure, understand, and perhaps one day even influence. It really makes you wonder about the unseen architecture of our world